You ever stop and think, what makes a promise actually stick? Legally, I mean. Well, today, we're going to break down contracts, the invisible rules that run pretty much everything, from your morning coffee run to the biggest decisions you'll ever make. Let's dive into the framework that makes our deals, well, real.
So I want you to take a second and actually think about this. No, really. How many legally binding agreements do you think you've made just in the last 24 hours? Take a guess.
You're probably thinking, zero? Maybe one or two at most. But the real number is almost certainly way, way higher. That coffee you bought this morning? Yep, that was a contract. The app you downloaded on your phone? You agreed to its terms, a contract. They are everywhere, kind of the invisible architecture of our daily lives.
So when you strip it all down, what is a contract? It's really just a promise that the law will enforce. It's an agreement to do something, or sometimes an agreement not to do something. Sounds simple, right? Well, yeah. But the details are where all the fun is. Okay, so to make sense of all this, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with how these things are even formed, and then how they actually work. After that, we'll get to the most important part, the 5 absolutely essential ingredients. Then we'll see what makes a contract valid, void, or something in between. And we'll wrap it all up with a contract's life cycle. All right, first up, how does a contract even come into being? Well, it turns out there are 2 main ways, either with your words or, believe it or not, just with your actions.
An express contract is the one we all think of, right? You talk it out, you negotiate. Hey, I'll pay you $30 to mow my lawn. You got a deal. Boom. The terms are right there, out in the open. But an implied contract is way more subtle. It's created just by what you do. When you sit down at a restaurant and order a meal, you don't say, I hereby agree to pay the menu price. Of course not. Your action of ordering implies that promise. Same legal weight, just a different way of getting there.
Okay, so we know how they're formed, but what's the actual dynamic inside the contract? Is it a two-way street where everybody's got a job to do, or is it more like a one-way offer that's just waiting for someone to act on it? So, a bilateral contract, that is your classic two-way street. Think about a typical sales contract. The seller is obligated to sell, and the buyer is obligated to buy. Both sides have a duty to perform. But a unilateral contract, that's a one-way street. A great example is an option contract. A seller might agree to give you the right to buy their property for the next year. You have zero obligation to actually buy it, but if you decide you want to, they have to sell. See the difference? Only one party is locked into an obligation from the start. And now we're getting to the absolute heart of it. This is the big one. For any agreement to actually hold up and be enforceable, it needs 5 essential ingredients. Think of this as your ultimate checklist for a legitimate deal.
And here they are. You need the right people making the deal, a clear agreement, a lawful reason for it, the right format for certain deals, and a fair exchange of value. Let's dig into what each of those really means.
First, you need competent parties. This just means the people involved have to be legally able to make a contract. This generally rules out minors, anyone under 18, who can typically back out of a contract if they want to. It also excludes anyone a court has deemed mentally incompetent.
Second is offer and acceptance. You'll hear lawyers call this a meeting of the minds. That's such a great phrase, right? It just means both sides have to be on the same page, agreeing to the same thing. This whole thing falls apart if there's fraud or even just a genuine mutual mistake, like if you think you're buying lot A and I think I'm selling lot B. No meeting of the minds, no contract. Third, the contract must have a legal purpose. This one is pretty straightforward. You can't have a legally binding contract to do something illegal. A contract to commit a crime is void. The law basically just pretends it never even happened. Fourth, for some specific deals, it's got to be in writing. This rule comes from a very old law called the Statute of Frauds, and its whole purpose is to prevent, well, fraud. The big examples you need to remember are contracts for the sale of real estate or leases that last for more than 1 year. A verbal agreement for those just won't hold up in court.
And finally, number 5, consideration. This one sounds way more complicated than it is. It's simply something of value exchanged for a promise. And here's the key part. It does not have to be money. In a typical real estate deal, the seller's consideration is their promise to give up the property, and the buyer's consideration is their promise to pay. A promise for a promise is perfectly good consideration.
So now that we have our checklist of 5 ingredients, we can understand the consequences. What happens when a contract has all of them or is missing one? This determines if it's a solid deal, a total dud, or somewhere in between.
And this table really clarifies things. A valid contract is simple. It has all 5 elements, it's good to go. A void contract is a non-starter. It's missing a core element, like a legal purpose, so it's treated like it never existed. But voidable is the tricky one. This is a real contract, but one person has a legal get-out-of-jail-free card, like the minor we mentioned. The contract is enforceable unless that party decides to cancel it.
All right, for our final section, let's look at the journey. Once a valid contract is signed, what actually happens? Let's trace its life from the initial promise all the way through to a completed deal.
Okay, so from the moment it's signed, that's the effective date, all the way until the deal is closed, a contract is called an executory contract. That's just a fancy way of saying there are still duties left to perform. The buyer needs to get financing, the seller needs to allow inspections. Once all those promises are fulfilled, usually at the closing, it becomes an executed contract. Mission complete.
But what if you want to get out of the deal before it's done? Well, that's where an assignment can come in. It lets you transfer your rights and duties to someone else. This is usually allowed unless the contract specifically forbids it. But be careful, you might still be on the hook as a backup if the new person doesn't perform.
Now, a much cleaner way to change things is with a novation. This isn't just passing the contract along, it's literally ripping up the old one and creating a brand new substitute. It's the ultimate reset button, especially useful if you want to bring in new parties and let the original ones walk away free and clear.
So you see, a contract isn't just a piece of paper. It's a living agreement with a specific recipe for success and a predictable life cycle. Now that you have the framework, the real question is, which invisible contract in your own life will you finally see clearly?